Hi, I'm Mark and welcome to Little Known Stocks, the show where I try to prove that being boring and doing your research will make you money. Now today I wanted to talk about Tattooed Chef, and I've seen a lot of videos recently about Tattooed Chef, mainly because there's been a massive run up in the price, which is great if you're a shareholder. But what I haven't seen is necessarily the in-depth research as to why this has happened and an explanation. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go into some speculation, but I'm going to back it with evidence, and I'm going to present as much data as I can for you to make up your mind as to why this has happened, which will enable you to understand whether there's going to be a pullback or whether this is a long-term growth for the share price. So to start with, let's explain exactly what's happened. If you look at the stock price over the past, let's say 4 months or 5 months, you can see quite a significant rundown, and if you were a shareholder at this point, you were thinking that you were losing quite a bit of money. It dropped down into the 15s at one point. It's showing 16.09 on this chart, but it was for a couple of days in the 15s on a fairly regular basis. If we look at the 5-day chart though, the recent return, the ramp up has been astronomical, and if we're thinking about Tattooed Chef, really, if you were able to get in at this 16, 15, 17 position, you're doing very, very well right now. I'm personally up around 22%, so I'm very, very happy at the moment. We have taken a slight run off down to the 21s at the moment, but nothing to be concerned about. Certainly after a run like that, you expect a slight pullback. So what's actually happened? So I'm going to talk about a couple of things. Firstly, I'm going to talk about a couple of news items that came out and were widely reported that might have driven the stock price up. Then I'm going to talk about looking at the institutional investors and who might actually be buying and selling Tattooed Chef. And that will really give us some insight into whether this is going to grow going forward and institutional investors are going to continue to buy, or whether it's a one-off and the stock price will either decline or stay where it is from here on out. So first off, before I talk about this channel, financial education is one of my favorite channels. It's the first channel that got me into investing, so really not slating the channel at all, but it's a big channel. A lot of investors pay attention to this channel, and Jeremy reported that Tattooed Chef is now in the UK. So it actually says already testing in the UK, but this was really the first widely reported news that Tattooed Chef was in the UK. But it's not his fault, he doesn't know, but Tattooed Chef has actually been in the UK for some time. So if I look at this tweet from December 13th, 2020, Tattooed Chef has been in Costco for a while in the UK. I actually did email Tattooed Chef, and they've said that I did actually go through and look at all countries to see whether I could find other countries selling across Europe. It is just the UK at the moment. It is just Costco, and they're confirmed it's just Costco right now. They're not planning to expand, or they're not announcing that they've expanded more internationally yet. So it's just in Costco. It's been in Costco for 5 months. I don't think that's what's driving the share price up. Now, the next thing is Tattooed Chef launching vegetable products in Whole Foods. And this, I think, could be a big mover and could be the reasons why a lot of institutional investors might get in to this stock. We've seen Tattooed Chef in a small way in Walmart. We've seen it in Target most recently. And Whole Foods are actually a big company in their own right, but they are owned by Amazon. And so really, you know, that's a big name in itself. But Whole Foods, even if it didn't expand elsewhere in the Amazon range, Whole Foods is a big customer. It's only the quite cheap products, $3.99 per bag, and it's the simpler products, but still that's significant. Opening that customer relationship, it may drive future business. So I think as a catalyst, that's very possibly what could be moving the stock. So the last thing being widely reported is that this is a short squeeze. Now, when we look at short squeezes, we need to understand the data. So the short interest, the number of shares that are being shorted is really important. So this is published by NASDAQ on a 15-day window. So we get lagging data every 15 days. And there are two types of numbers reported in shorts. One is the short interest of the shares outstanding, which is of the total shares, so 17.48%, which seems quite low. But then the short interest of the float, which is essentially the shares that are available publicly, is 69.6, and that's really the one that's going to drive the price up or down. So that is really very substantial, but it has been growing consistently, and the last update we got was on the 24th of May, so quite recently, and it did grow. It did grow to over 14 million shares, which is quite high. But when we look at the overall volume that's actually been traded short still, it hasn't really changed over the past several days. The volume of shorts remains around 25-ish%. And although we did see a dip on the 27th, certainly there's a lot of people still shorting this stock. So I don't think this is necessarily a short squeeze. Certainly that would have contributed. There would have been some positions closed, but I think people still have an overall short sentiment on Tattooed Chef, or certainly a very strong sentiment from some of the institutional investors. Now, if we look at the put to call ratios across a various number of days, we can actually see it's been pretty consistently low. We've been around the 0.15 for some time, certainly on the 60-day, and actually you see a spike up on the 60-day after the run up. Same on the 30-day, you see a big spike after the run up, and it was pretty low prior to that. And then, 20-day, you actually see that we did have some shorting going on in the middle of May, but certainly it's quite a low volume and around the 0.15 to 1 level. So I really don't think that that's driving anything. And I don't think this is a significant driver of the price upwards. Now let's come on to the institutions and how they're moving the stock and how I see that impacting the share price over the next few months. So how do we actually find out what's happened and who's taking ownership? Well, when we look at a company and investigate a company and their filings, we might look at the 10Q or the 8K files to understand what's happening in the company. When we're looking at who's buying and selling the company, we have some data, although it is lagging data. Most notably, you have the 13F and M port filings. So there are a number of classes of 13 files, which all relate to ownership in particular companies. But the 13F is required quarterly, and M port filings are filed monthly. So you can get some interesting data in terms of buying and selling, although there is lag in that data. But we can look through that and understand what's happening in the market overall. So if you look at the actual ownership of Tattooed Chef, firstly, Sam Galletti, the CEO, being the largest shareholder, owning just under 40% of the company is really good as a shareholder. It protects you from a lot of institutional investor selling. Hopefully he'll be a long-term shareholder and won't sell further shares. But you look at a lot of these other investors. Glazer Capital sold off towards the back end of 2020. Falcon Edge Capital are a big one. They own around 6%, and you've got UMB Capital down here as well. So UMB actually came on board as shareholders this year, and they really have been owning since around, reported in February, so Q4 2020. Falcon have been there for a long time, but if we look at their historical share ownership, we can actually see that in February they actually sold quite a large number of their shares, 851,000, which is very significant, and that's really what I see as the catalyst for the share price moving down in Tattooed Chef during that time, and there were further sell-offs after that. We then have, as I said, UMB Capital filed on the 4th of February, so we don't know exactly when the shares were purchased, but we know that they then had 4.5 million shares, which is really, really significant, and brought them up as the second owner, around 7.2%. So to support what I actually think happened, I've come to Fintel, and I'm going to use the data from the 13F and M-port filings, which is the most up-to-date data that I can get. And what I've done is I've extracted into Excel. Unfortunately, you need a premium account, and that's given me all of the transactions that have happened and all of the reportings that have happened over the past several months. What should be immediately apparent is that the sentiment has changed. So if we look at 2020, December, there were quite a bit of selling reported, not that much. The selling sentiment across January, February, not March. March saw an uptick, but April, again, very, very strong selling mentality in terms of the big investor groups. But in May, well, remember this is reported, so there is a lag on this, but in May we saw an absolutely massive change in that sentiment. We saw an uptick to a lot of buying sentiment. And really that's what I think is changing this stock and the sentiments of this stock. Remember, it's lagging, so I think there will be more, but I think there are seriously big investors coming on board now and driving this price up, which is great news. Not only that, but if we look at, I've filtered out just the new positions, we see the majority of that position is new. So we didn't see really many new positions at all in April, but in May we've really come out strong, and 1.4 million shares purchased as new positions. That is really great, and we're starting to see the institutions take note of Tattooed Chef and come on board, which is what I think is driving the new upwards trajectory. So when we look at who's actually holding the shares, Falcon, we know were at the SPAC stage. They've been shareholders for a while. They did sell off a number of shares, as I said earlier, so that may represent a risk going forward that they do so again. But Vanguard Group really have started to buy into these shares in a big way, and that's a big thing. If you don't know who Vanguard are, you may or may not own Vanguard ETF. They're a massive buyer of shares, so that really will be driving the price and at least keeping it ticking over. But then you've got a number of other areas here that are buying quite a bit. The other thing to note is that we've got some companies here, I think Jane Street and Citadel are two examples here, some of the big holders who have actually had put positions in the past, and they've actually had to buy either call options or just buy shares to balance it out. And so really you're seeing those puts counteracted through some purchasing of shares there as well. So very interesting, and I think we're seeing more and more institutional investors. If we look at just the number of new investors in this space, that's what I believe is driving the price. And I think this is the turning point really, where Wall Street is starting to take note of this stock, and certainly you can see that in the figures here. So when we look at who's actually holding the shares, Falcon, we know were at the SPAC stage. They've been shareholders for a while. They did sell off a number of shares, as I said earlier, so that may represent a risk going forward that they do so again. But Vanguard Group really have started to buy into these shares in a big way, and that's a big thing. If you don't know who Vanguard are, you may or may not own Vanguard ETF. They're a massive buyer of shares, so that really will be driving the price and at least keeping it ticking over. So one of the great things about Vanguard is they actually report their holdings at the end of every month, and you can search this on their website. So I've searched for Tattooed Chef, and I found 6 index funds that Vanguard are currently managing that contain Tattooed Chef, all of less than 0.01%, so tiny in comparison to the overall size of the holdings. You can go into each of these holdings, and when I do that, most of them are met, well, 3 of the 6 are met with a page unavailable error message, unfortunately, so I can't give a detail of exactly what they are holding. But if we remember, last reported or reportable on the Fintel website, 1.5 million shares reported there as of the last reporting. So of the 3 indexes that I could look into, the shares actually add up to 1.46 million shares, so only about 100,000 shares outstanding versus the last reporting of Vanguard Group at 1.529, even less than 100,000 in fact. And it's possible that those 3 extra indexes add up to 100,000 or around that number, but given the size of the indexes, I don't think that's the case. I think Vanguard Group will be holding substantially more than the 1.5 million that they were last time. And this is really, really great news for Tattooed Chef. The more index funds that get Tattooed Chef in them, the more shares will be bought on a passive basis as those funds grow, as people invest their money. It will just be keeping that upwards pressure on the stock price, and that's really, really good for us as investors. So that's all I've got time for. Again, it's just my opinion on what's happened, but hopefully I've presented enough data to support the case. And really that's what I wanted to get across, what I'm looking at, what I'm trying to do to understand rather than just speculating on what's happening in the stock. So if you like the video, please give a thumbs up, and a subscribe would be great. Otherwise, have a great day.